Hello again. Now, environmental experts are once again sounding the alarm over climate change. This comes after the release of Nature Ecology and Evolution study that has looked at 35,000 species from around the world and how they would adapt to 4 different climate projections. Research teams say that once the thermal exposure threshold is exceeded, species face a heightened and sudden risk of collapse. Now, to help us unpack this report and help us to understand it a little bit, I'm joined now by one of its authors, Dr. Christopher Trisos from the University of Cape Town. Prof, good afternoon and welcome to today here on eNCA this afternoon. How far gone are we? Have we reached the tipping point?
Not yet, but we are close. There are many species at grave risk from climate change. But if we take rapid action this decade, there is a lot we can save. This is a critical decade for climate action. And what the science is showing clearly in this report is that global warming, so that's the increase in the temperature on average globally because of greenhouse gas emissions from burning fossil fuels and from deforestation and other destruction of high carbon ecosystems, that's warmed the planet. And this report is saying about 15% of species globally could be at risk of sudden collapse of their geographic ranges, sudden population collapse because of high temperatures. But that risk doubles if we go over 2 degrees Celsius of global warming. So I see this report really as a call to action for fast implementation of reducing greenhouse gases, because there are thousands of species we can save if we do that.
By how much has our planet warmed up in terms of degrees over the last couple of decades?
Since 1850, so when the Industrial Revolution really started going, when we started burning a lot more coal, oil, and gas from the 1850s to now, that 170-year period, it's 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer. And science projects that in a decade from now, the first few years of the 2030s will be at 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer. And that's when things start to get really dangerous. They're already dangerous now for people living in highly vulnerable contexts, like people living in Durban. Many people lost their lives there with those extreme heavy precipitation events, or the Cape Town drought. The Cape Town drought, the reduced rainfall behind that drought, it's estimated was 3 times more likely to have happened because of human-caused climate change.
And we're seeing tropical cyclones in our neck of woods getting more severe. Just now we saw Cyclone Freddy, which is now known as the longest lasting and most severe kind of cyclone to hit our shores all the way from the Pacific, making its way over Mauritius, Madagascar to Mozambique, out and back again. Never happened before.
Yes, so that higher intensity of tropical cyclones on the east coast of Africa is consistent with the science on climate change and global warming. So the projection is that we'll get fewer of them, a lower frequency, but the ones that do hit will be more intense winds and heavier rainfall.
Yeah, so what do we need to do urgently? You said there's a sense of urgency now to reduce carbon emissions. What do we need to do?
There's really 2 things. There's 2 parts of the solution, and we have to do both of them. The first one is reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. And the second one is adapting to the risks of this more dangerous climate. So reducing the greenhouse gas emissions to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, remember we're already at 1.1, means that we've got to cut our greenhouse gas emissions globally by 43% by the end of this decade. The good news is that a lot of the technology and the innovation to do that already exists today, like wind power and solar power. And in many countries, including in places in South Africa, that renewable energy is cheaper than the current fossil fuel alternatives. So it's also just good business sense to do that rapid greenhouse gas reduction. And then the second part is adapting to the risks, making ourselves more resilient to these extreme climate events like droughts and tropical cyclones and floods. And there it's really important, the science shows, to focus adaptation on vulnerable ecosystems and vulnerable people, such as in South Africa, many people living in low-income or marginalized groups, like living in our informal settlements, to really prioritize finance, often from the public sector, but increasingly the private sector has to play a role as well in providing more adaptation options for those communities so they're better protected from things like floods or heat waves.
Yeah, you know, we always say, oh, about climate change, it's in the future, it's not now. But that's a fallacy, because we're already seeing the impact. And if we just folded our arms and didn't do any of what you've suggested, we'll be in more trouble in a shorter period of time than we think.
Yes, you're completely correct. So I think the time for saying, this is a problem in the future for our children is over. We know that if we stop burning all fossil fuels and emitting all greenhouse gases today, we would see a slowdown in global warming within a couple of decades. So well within the lifetimes of people alive today. And we also know that the climate is, in the near term, continuing to get more dangerous because we burn those fossil fuels. So 1.5 degrees of warming, that's only about a decade or a little bit more than a decade away. Most people alive today will see the damages and the losses from that. And so it is really important for us to take this rapid action to reduce carbon emissions and also to adapt. It benefits us, and it will extremely be beneficial for our children and future generations. But it benefits us alive today. It's our problem as well as future generations.